Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to write a rhetorical analysis essay, specifically for a prompt that asks how the author uses rhetorical strategies to build his or her argument.
I've printed out one of the sample essays from the SAT website. So this is the second sample essay, and you'll notice here that I've already labeled it. So one thing that I recommend is that students identify the author. So I put A. Now he is male, even though it says Dana. So anytime it is a unisex name or perhaps a foreign name where you're not really sure whether or not it's a male or female author, look for the pronouns in the prompt. For this, it's actually on the second page where it says his argument. That way you use the correct pronouns when you're writing. So we have author, we have the title, G is for genre. In this case, it's an article. We know that because it's put in quotes, and also because it mentions the New York Times. So this does not take much time at all, but this way you can refresh your memory if you need to remember who the author is, what it's called, that kind of thing. So that is the first thing that I have my students annotate. Now, I have written all over this, but I kind of want to show you guys what I do when I annotate, and you can take parts of this, you can adapt it in different ways. What I recommend doing is doing a bullet point of kind of like a summary after each paragraph. And so here it says commences with claim that young Americans, and that should be possessive there, literary interest has declined. Okay, so it's kind of summarizing what this paragraph says. And I also put these little arrows here because rose, ballooned, and increased, those are words that suggest something positive, it's going up, whereas diminish is negative, it's going down. So on the side here, it says juxtaposition. All right, so juxtaposition references this. So I basically have a summary here, and then on the side, I just put a reference to a strategy or choice. It gets a little bit crowded, especially when you write in a marker like I did, but it's okay. So I try to underline very sparingly because on the exam, whether it's the SAT or the AP language exam, unfortunately, you don't get the use of a highlighter. So I try to make sure that I underline only important things. That way, when you go back to look for evidence, you are drawn to what you've underlined. So here we've got survey and then just like who it's from. Got the word declines, most severe, then the age group, and then reading literature. So I summarized it here. When I summarize, I try to use active verb choice. So we got supports here, commences here, because I can turn these sentences into a sentence in my essay rather quickly. So even though this might seem like it's time consuming, if you practice this, you can get it done very quickly. So it says supports claim with survey evidence, suggesting college-age students are reading less. Okay, so basically we've got what and why here, or at least the start of it. What is he saying? And then why is he saying it? Why does it matter? Now he's building into his argument. So right now he's identifying the problem, okay? So he's introducing his argument by proving that there's a problem. So here's our problem. Here's the first attempt to support that with evidence. He's doing it through a survey. So we've got logos. Now, logos means logic. So anytime you have data, statistics, a survey, that's going to be logos. You don't actually need to use the word logos. In fact, I would encourage you not to use the word logos. Here you could say that he cites a survey, he references a survey. You don't actually need to use the word logos. Next paragraph. Didn't really put a strategy over here, just noted that they're not reading fiction or nonfiction. Okay, so just a quick note there. If we turn the page, we got more notes on this. So basically, we've got the word decline again, but now we're starting to talk about the business world. We've got Wired magazine, so he's citing another source. And then there's this contrast here because employers don't want these linear logical skills, which seem to relate more to like math or science. Instead, they want the ability to create and to be artistic, which seems to be connected to literature and the arts. So we've got juxtaposition here again, different things being contrasted, but still a contrast. And then also logos. And I just drew the line here because they cite something else in this paragraph. So same two strategies. And then I just put cites Wired to assert business leaders value traits that are cultivated through reading. First, we identify a problem. Now we're starting to get to why that problem matters. Well, employers want people to be able to have these skills that one can achieve through reading. And so we've got more references to decline here. We've got another survey or like poll here. So furthers argument by noting that some, so 38% consider schools to be the problem. I kind of paraphrase that, but the question here is, how does the author build his argument? So build, develop, advance, those are all words that we can be using here. So he's building his argument through a series of surveys. He's using evidence from different sources to bolster the credibility of his claim. I also noted repetition. We've got the word decline used several times. We have another study here. So advances argument by introducing the claim that a lack of literary awareness yields a lack of civil awareness. Okay, so we're going from just business to now civics. We've got juxtaposition and logos again. So we've got another like survey here, like the findings of it. And then we've got this idea that if you are reading, you are more engaged. So we've got this contrast between people who don't read and they're not engaged versus people who do and they are. Okay, and I wrote the word conversely there just to remind myself that I might want to use that word if I was writing an essay, just to show the difference. When examining how an author builds his or her argument, we need to recognize that it's leading to a call to action. So I've listed that here because the call to action usually comes at the end. So we see that present here in these two paragraphs, predominantly in this sentence where the author talks about how schools and libraries do noble work. But if we want to solve the issue, we need help from the business community and politicians as well. So basically, the author notes that it's going to be a cooperative effort to solve this problem. The call to action comes at the end because first we have to prove that there is a problem and establish why that problem matters. In this case, it matters to the whole country and the future of the country before we can ask people to act, in this case, to come together. The downside, though, is the author doesn't really specify how. The author does not really add a solution. So when asked to examine the effectiveness, one might talk about how there's a reference to a call to action here, but that the author does not really develop a solution. At the end here, the author reasserts the value of reading. Okay, we kind of say, at least in oral comm, tell him what you're going to tell him, tell him what you told him. So he has to reassert the value of reading. That's why the word decline is so prominent throughout this piece, is because we need to emphasize the problem if we're going to get people to buy into a solution. All right, and then also we have the consequence here. If people don't do anything about it, society will be weaker. It's hard to not want to act when you're told that society will be weaker if you don't. In regard to time, I would say that if students can practice doing this, just a bullet point for each paragraph or maybe every other paragraph, you can become more adept at this and you can start to practice using appropriate verbs. Now for this, notice that we said logos and juxtaposition on the side multiple times. For a lot of passages, especially on the AP Lang exam, students want to write a paragraph about logos and a paragraph about repetition, maybe a paragraph about juxtaposition. While that's not necessarily wrong, it's very strategy driven. And since the strategies are spread throughout, like we see it a little bit here, a little bit here, it would be important to track that through the whole piece. So what one might do instead is kind of divide it into sections. So we've got kind of like a middle section here, a concluding section here. So sometimes it's easier to look at the passage chronologically, especially when the prompt says, how does the author build an argument? So let's look at what that would look like in terms of writing an essay. One thing I do with my students is I have them practice writing thesis statements for almost every piece that we read. I give them a basic AP Lang question 2 prompt. What strategies does the author use to achieve his or her purpose? And they write a thesis statement because we need a strong thesis statement. However, you also need to know how to write an intro. So for an intro, ideally we would have a hook, context, and thesis. So here we've got our hook. We're just kind of talking about why this is an issue. The hook also in this case is a bit of context. But when I say context, I mean context as in what is the article or passage that we're talking about. So we've got our author, we've got our genre, in this case an article, we've got the title, And then here is the actual thesis. Now, I did a quick write, like I did what my students do. So this took me about 5 minutes. Now, for a 40-minute essay on the AP Lang exam, that's not bad, but we don't want to waste a ton of time on the intro. So the words I've underlined here, we've got cites, surveys, notes, contrast. Okay, notice that I didn't use logos and I didn't necessarily even use juxtaposition. However, it's clear that I'm going to write about surveys and the contrast. So those are the choices. Right here we've got repeatedly, which suggests I might talk about repetition. And then again, noting, argues, failing to address implies the call to action. So notice that you don't necessarily have to use the strategy names. You can use a verb form of the strategies. Now, how would this translate to an actual essay? In body paragraph 1, the major thing that I want to talk about is that the author identifies the problem. So he introduces his argument. You need to tell them what the argument is. Even if they tell you in the passage or the prompt, you need to reword it in your own words. And I tell my students, every time you say builds his argument, furthers his argument, you always have to say that what. Always tell me what the argument is, even if you've already told me, because it shows that you're adept at knowing the passage. Now, to do this, you need to vary your word choice a little bit, which gets tricky. So I would talk about how the author introduces the argument. I would specify what the argument is. And then also in that same paragraph, how he furthers his claim. Okay, so that's referencing the prompt about building an argument with evidence that American youth read less than previous generations, and that basically they're reading a lot less fiction and nonfiction. This might not be a super long paragraph, but I would pull evidence from those first couple paragraphs. So I would reference some of the quotes that I underlined. Let's talk about where the essay would go. So we would go to paragraph 2. So my second body paragraph, that's the symbol for paragraph, by the way. We've got cites, additional resources. So I would talk about maybe Wired magazine, things like that in this portion of the paragraph. And then he shifts from a business or employment focus to civics. This one would probably be a much longer paragraph, but this is focusing on how he's expanding the implications of the problem. So first we identify the problem, then we talk about how it affects the business world and employment, and here we talk about how it affects the nation. And I would pull evidence for both of those and obviously provide commentary. Now, I would do a third body paragraph for this. My third body paragraph would focus on the call to action. So he's building to this major claim that we need to come together, and he reminds the audience of the consequences. I would cite certain quotes for this as well and offer more commentary about like why it's a problem, but basically I would do 3 body paragraphs. Now, students sometimes ask how many body paragraphs do we need? I would say at least 2, but sometimes you can do 3. I would rather my students do 3 well-developed body paragraphs and forego a conclusion than just do 2 body paragraphs and have a very weak conclusion. For the SAT, sometimes students do as many as 4 body paragraphs. My perspective is to simply develop your argument well, and if you do 4 body paragraphs but you underdevelop them, then you're shortchanging yourself. So make sure that whatever you claim, that you can develop that paragraph well. So I'm actually going to be doing a video on that later on in the next couple weeks about how to develop a paragraph. But the idea here is that 3 body paragraphs should be sufficient to prove how the author develops his claim. And I would want to tie in some kind of reflection on the audience perhaps as well. If I had a lack of time, I would forego this bullet point right here, but you do want to reference the audience. You want to reference the relationship between the speaker, the message, and the audience. So those are the 3 body paragraphs that I would write. And then if I had time, I would do a conclusion. If not, I would stop with this one. I would stop after this body paragraph and just kind of wrap it all up nicely.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful for those of you who are taking either AP Lang or who are preparing for the SAT essay. If you are, good luck. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe. I will link my other rhetorical analysis videos here as well in case you're curious. Until next time, guys, happy writing.